And so I'm going to go ahead and hit the record and we'll get started. I'm thrilled to have you guys here today for our kickoff for our early accessible education material echo. Again, if you'll just put your name and contact information into the chat. We are recording today's session. We use these for educational and quality improvement purposes. They will be stored on our iEcho account. So by participating in the session, you're consenting to being recorded. Please don't disconnect. It's, again, just a great way to learn from each other. If you've never been to an Echo session, we're thrilled to have you for our first one. We're really excited about this network that is supported by NCADEMI. So we will always have a subject matter expert. Today we are lucky to have Cynthia, who is over NCADEMI, kind of give us a kickoff on that. And then we will have a case presentation where we all brainstorm ideas together that helps facilitate that professional networking. We do love when you rename your profiles so we can see those, everybody on the call. If you need to know how to do that, here is some instructions. I know we've all been on Zoom for a little bit, and so might know how to do that, as well as to raise your hand. It is on your Zoom link at the bottom, and you can do reactions or anything you would like. We love interactions, so please turn on your cameras if you're able to. We love to have comments in chat. We also love to discuss cases. A lot of times we're doing work that we sometimes feel like we're out here doing it on our own. And so discussing those case narratives are a great way to do that. Today, we are going to be doing some community questions that our amazing hub members help develop. Our hub members have an asterisk in front of their names, so they are easier to find in chat. We do ask that you protect individual privacy, so please de-identify any information. Again, if you're unsure about that, please reach out to one of the hub members and we'll get you help on that. Just a reminder of Echo session etiquette. So please respect the presenter. Either use chat or raise your hand to ask those questions or contribute to that. Keep your questions on topic and brief, and be sure to introduce yourself before you ask that question. Again, it helps us create that kind of professional networking in a virtual world. We will be dropping a survey in throughout today's session, and that is how we will email if you would like a credit for an attendance certificate. But we would also love to hear your feedback. That's what's going to guide some of this network going forward with the questions and concerns that you guys are seeing from the field. Again, just another plug for case studies. If you're interested, please reach out to Project Echo at usu.edu. And then again, thank you for your participation. I'm going to share another screen of mine to just walk through. I know our iEcho can be a little challenging at times to navigate, but on this right here where it says content will be where the recording is stored, as well as all of the information that is shared during sessions. So like I said, Cynthia is going to be presenting for us today, and her material is stored all in here. So I'm going to, once again, stop sharing and turn the time over to Cynthia.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle, and welcome everyone to this first session of the Early accessible educational materials echo community. This has been it's something that's been in progress for over a year. We didn't know that we were going to have an echo, but when we discovered that that would be an option, we realized that it is an excellent fit for what we're trying to accomplish at NCADEMI. And I'm just thrilled to have this partnership with Janelle and the ECHO project at USU, which I know also extends to other universities, other organizations, and that many of you are here because of your positive experience as ECHO members, and I really look forward to learning from you. I will say before I even begin my presentation that I am not an expert in early intervention or early childhood education. My area of expertise is primarily in K-12 and post-secondary and the provision of accessible materials for students with disabilities, as well as assistive technology. I've had children. Neither of my children are users of assistive technology, however. So I don't have this experience, but I love learning from others about how my expertise can help inform improved access for children with disabilities. And so this ECHO is really an important opportunity for NCADEMI to support the field, to learn from all of you, and to discover what are the resources that are going to be most helpful to help agencies, to help parent centers, better understand accessible educational materials in the larger context of where children are going in their education, but also together determining what does this look like in that 0 to 5-year-old age range? How do we start preparing infants and toddlers who are going to need accessible educational materials as they age? What are the types of things? What are the practices? What are the strategies that we can introduce early? So I'm really excited to get to know all of you and to work with you and to discover what is it that we can do together to improve access for our youngest learners. I'm going to go ahead and start my slide deck. This should pop right up. Okay, so I am your subject matter expert today, but I'm really not an expert. I am here. My role is to really set the stage for the early AIM Echo. So I'm providing an overview of the National Center on Accessible Digital Educational Materials and Instruction, or NCADEMI, which is the center that is supporting this network in partnership with Project ECHO at USU, an overview of accessible educational materials, and setting this context for infants and toddlers. The outline is that I will share some information about NCADEMI, and I know many of you are familiar with NCADEMI and have been using our resources, not in the context of early intervention and early childhood education. So this is really exciting to launch this aspect of the center. Our technical assistance and the early AIM ECHO community, what's the relationship there? And then finally, a discussion on the relationships among accessibility, accessible educational materials, assistive technology, and early learning. So a little bit about NCADEMI. We're a technical assistance center funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. We're fairly young. We're only about a year and a half old. We launched in October of 2024. So we are in year 2 of our project. We spent most of year 1 learning about what are the needs of the field. So I'll share some of that. That explains why our technical assistance for our targeted areas, which Part C and parent centers and early intervention, our targeted technical assistance area of NCADEMI. That's why we're launching it at this stage of the progression of our 4-year center. We're funded for 4 years through October of 2028. So our primary responsibility under our funding is to support state and local education agencies in the improvement of accessible digital educational materials and instruction for learners with disabilities from preschool through high school graduation. However, the way the center is structured is really to support sort of more holistic approach to all of the different areas from which students and their families enter K-12, and how they exit K-12. And that's what brings us to the early AIM Echo. We're based at Utah State University, and we're administered within Utah's UCED, the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, or the IDRPP. And we're a partnership, and NCADEMI is really staffed in partnership between two centers that have a long history and deep roots at the IDRPP. Those are WebAIM, that's Web Accessibility in Mind, which has been providing technical assistance and training on web accessibility for 25 years, and TACE. And TACE is the Technical Assistance Center for Excellence in Special Education. And TACE has been providing technical assistance under IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, for states and districts for over 40 years. So between the IDRPP, WebAIM, and TACE, NCADEMI is really well situated with deep resources and rich staff with really rich experiences to support our technical assistance. We have 2 tiers of technical assistance that's part of NCADEMI, and these are very common to OSEP technical assistance centers. This is something that you will commonly see across any TA center funded by OSEP, like NCADEMI. Universal TA is more of a general technical assistance and information that's provided to independent users through their own initiative, resulting in minimal interaction with TA project staff. So NCADEMI's universal technical assistance looks like webinars that are publicized through our general events section of our website. We have practice and policy briefs that are also available on our website. We've recently launched an Accessibility Fundamentals course on Canvas that anyone can access anytime. And these are all examples of universal activities that really don't involve a lot of interaction with NCADEMI staff. And then there's our targeted technical assistance tier. And these are specialized TA services that are based on, that are based on needs common to multiple recipients and not extensively individualized. It's in our targeted technical assistance that a relationship is established between the technical assistance recipient and one or more of the project staff. So for targeted TA, this ECHO community is an example of NCADEMI's targeted technical assistance activities. It's customized to meet what we've identified as a need common to people who work with young children with disabilities and or their families. And over the coming months, Janelle, as well as Alex Langevin, who you'll see in the chat, is also an NCADEMI staff, and Kita Badashali, who's also with NCADEMI. Us, as well as our hub team, look forward to building a relationship with you and this community as part of the ECHO. The other targeted TA that NCADEMI offers, we have 5 different targeted TA audiences. As I mentioned earlier, state and local educational agencies are really our primary target audience. Under OSEP, we're funded under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA funding, but primarily looks at Part B and the K-12 space and supporting states and school districts with ensuring that pre-K-12 students with disabilities are receiving materials that they can use with their assistive technology in a timely manner alongside students without disabilities. We also provide targeted TA with our Part C lead agencies and early intervention service providers. We provide targeted TA to parent centers, and our goal there is to support parent center staff who are working with families of children who require accessible educational materials, and supporting parent centers with resources and activities that help them better support and prepare families to communicate on behalf of their children with disabilities what they need for accessible educational materials that's part of the IEP or part of the 504 program. And as part of this ECHO, we've also encouraged and invited parent center staff who are interested in working with families of infants and toddlers with disabilities, as well as preschoolers who need accessible educational materials. So we're welcome to this early AIM ECHO parent center staff as well. We also have a targeted TA group, or a community of practice, for educator preparation programs. And our goal there is to support teacher education faculty, administrator education faculty, and anybody within those special education or general education program pathways in teacher ed to better prepare better prepare staff who are going into the field, whether they're administrators, school leaders, teachers, to be better prepared to provide accessible materials and instruction. And then for OSEP-funded centers, we are a center that provides technical assistance to help them ensure that the products and services that they're developing for TA recipients are also accessible. So diving over into NCADEMI's technical assistance and the Early AIM ECHO community and what this looks like. Before I move over, I'm just going to do a quick check to see if there's anything in the chat. Okay. And Janelle, I assume you'll let me know if any questions come up.
Yep.
Sounds good. So why an early AIM ECHO? Kind of divided this up into two separate reasons, one more interesting than the other, I think we could all argue. One being compliance obligations as one reason for an early AIM ECHO, and then the other reason is to support inclusive learning. On the compliance obligations, NCADEMI's technical assistance is aligned with Part C and Part B of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So when it comes to legal compliance, we'll be mostly considering what IDEA requires of agencies that's in relation to children with disabilities and their families in the age range of 0 to 5 years old. And then under inclusive learning, it's much more interesting than the compliance part. We want to know is how the early AIM ECHO can inform your goals for improving inclusive learning environments, especially in those early learning environments, whether that's in the home or in an educational setting. So let's take a deeper dive into into the compliance obligations, and then we'll look at the goals for inclusive learning. To frame the legal argument for an early AIM ECHO, I'm going to point to OSEP's 2024 notice inviting applications for a National Center on Digital Access in Education. That center, the National Center on Digital Access in Education, ultimately became NCADEMI. So what I'm going to do is kind of point to why OSEP was advocating for why this center provides technical assistance to Part C. So this is called out in the OSEP themselves called out the need for Part C technical assistance from this center. And in that they said, in order for children with disabilities served under IDEA to benefit from education, special education, and early intervention services, agencies, so that includes state education agencies, local education agencies, and Part C lead agencies, and schools must provide accommodations needed by children and families to ensure their access and participation in learning. So this really kind of pulls together sort of that big picture of making sure that in this, sort of the trajectory or the continuum of the needs of children with disabilities, that we start as early as possible to prepare them, to prepare their families, to prepare educators, because we know that the earlier students are provided with the technology, whether it's assistive technology, digital materials that work for them, the more likely they are to enter kindergarten better prepared for school. And then there was another statement that was part of that notice inviting applications, and I'll drop that link in the chat. I pulled an excerpt, and I'll also drop it in the chat because I think it also really helps to extend and explain the rationale for why this Technical Assistance Center is providing TA under Part C. And let me grab that excerpt. Hopefully the NIA excerpt worked, and it's also, as Janelle pointed out, you'll also find it in the iEcho platform as well. But in the notice inviting applications, the way OSEP presented this center's responsibility for providing TA under Part C is that under Part C of IDEA, early intervention services are designed to meet the developmental needs of infants and toddlers with disabilities as identified through a multidisciplinary evaluation. These services may include assistive technology, or AT, and supports for communication development for young children to enable them to make measurable progress towards results or outcomes identified in their individualized family service plans. Additionally, early intervention services include, quote, the design of learning environments and activities that promote the infants or toddlers' acquisition of skills. For these young learners and their families, special instruction, assistive technology, and supports for communication increasingly incorporate digital materials and technologies, including mobile applications, video, and tools for developing print and braille awareness. And there are references there to the American Printing House for the Blind and some research that the National Center for Accessible Educational Materials, or the AIM Center, conducted in 2020. So these are, I cited the page there. There's also on slide 21, I believe, of the slide deck are the references. But I can also point you within if the NIA is not there and you're interested in looking at the NIA for the center and the rationale for Part C TA, I'm happy to point you to that. But I really thought it was important to establish from OSEP's perspective, why this center is providing a TA to Part C lead agencies. And I would argue it was very insightful on their part to extend the TA that NCADEMI provides, which is, really primarily would be focused to accessible educational materials that are provided in the context of pre-K-12 to really sort of back up into the early years around what do we need for preparation to ensure that children with disabilities and their families are successful when they reach Part B, early childhood education. And then looking at the inclusive learning side, so we talked about the reason for an early AIM ECHO being the legal obligations, but also for supporting goals around inclusive learning and early childhood education. So we like to look at in our, as part of this ECHO, a few things to consider. One being, what is the appropriate use of digital media and technology in the early years? We know that is a concern. When we're talking about accessible digital materials used in teaching and learning, there's a lot of debate. There is a lot of deliberation about the appropriate use of technology. What is it that we should be concerned about for the amount of screen time that children have? What are they giving up if we're putting technology in front of students for learning or for recreation or for socialization? Regardless of what it is, we know that there's a consideration. At NCADEMI, we are not necessarily advocates for providing digital education, but we really want to make sure that when digital materials and technology are used, that it's equitable and that children with disabilities are also able to participate and make progress. So we can think about that as part of the ECHO. We encourage debate about what is the guidance on age appropriateness and the use of digital media and technology in these early years. We also want to consider when that technology is being used, what are the effective uses in early childhood education or ECE programs for cognitive and social development. And there are some things to think about. I know many of you who conduct this research could add more recent research. You could probably point to more robust research than what's listed here. But I just wanted to point out that this is part of we welcome this part of the ECHO community around what are the best practices around the use of technology in early childhood education. We know that that technology, when used appropriately, there are some good uses. It could be used to aid instruction, support relationship building, expand access to high quality content, enhance the use of routines, and facilitate interactions with peers. So the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC, had a joint position statement in 2012 that provides early childhood educators and families with guidance on how to use technology within the framework of developmentally appropriate practice. And I'm not sure how to pronounce the other researcher's name, but Lycee et al. In 2021 provides specific examples of effective use of technology in preschool programs, such as using video and ebooks with practices for reflection, for building academic skills, developing creativity, writing, and communication skills as well. And Fluid and All, which is a 2024 article that is based in the UK, so the United Kingdom, so it's not a US-based research, but there are some findings there that also indicate benefits of appropriate use of technology in early learning while continuing to conduct research on what is the best practice of the use of that technology. So these references are, or the citations are on slide 21. So if you're looking for, these articles, you'll find the references on that slide. So once we talk about, age appropriateness, effective use in early childhood education, and acknowledge that maybe technology isn't always the answer, but when it is, how could we ensure that students with disabilities also have access to those learning opportunities? We can talk about what are the services, the practices, and accommodations that Part C lead agencies, early intervention service providers, and parent center staff can promote to prepare infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families for inclusive early childhood learning environments. So, given all of that background, the goal for our early AIM Echo community is very broad, and we look forward to going into lots of different directions based on what's important to all of you, your expertise, who you want to hear from. But overall, the goal is that community members will gain knowledge and practical skills to improve the consideration and use of assistive technology, or AT, and accessible educational materials, AIM, for children with disabilities in the transition from Part C early intervention to Part B early childhood education. So this also applies to that transition between the Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP, and the Individualized Education Program, or IEP. What are the implications for that documentation? So then, moving into the broader context of what does this look like? So I've been using the word accessible, been using the phrase accessible educational materials, assistive technology. How do these components relate to early learning? And so again, to set the context, I will pull out the A in NCADEMI, the National Center on Accessible Digital Educational Materials and Instruction, and break that down. Accessible means that a child with a disability, and this is sort of adapted because typically a person or an individual, but we'll stay sort of in that early childhood experience. So we're talking about young children with disabilities, ensuring that they can access the same information, engage in the same interactions, and otherwise participate in or benefit from the same services, programs, and activities as children without disabilities, in a manner that provides substantially equivalent timeliness, privacy, independence, and ease of use. So this definition comes from the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. It most recently appeared with those qualifiers, timeliness, privacy, independence, and ease of use, in the ADA Title II final rule that was published in April of 2024. So sometimes we could think about this definition and say, well, this really doesn't apply in early childhood education or to children, but we can really use it as a framework for that, because the goal is inclusion, the same information, same interactions, same services, programs, and activities. So we can always accommodate, but the goal is not to exclude. And so this definition, I would argue, is a really good one for this ECHO to, if not adopt, to be looking at as a starting point for thinking about what is our vocabulary when it comes to thinking about accessibility of the materials provided in early childhood learning. And what does that preparation look like in early intervention? So those terms, those qualifiers that I just identified in the definition, we can call them terms of accessible educational materials, whether that material is something that's used in the home with a young child, or whether it is something that's used in employment by an individual with a disability to complete their daily tasks on the job. That whatever it is, that individual with a disability receives that material when they need it in order to succeed. So timeliness means that the material is usable by learners with disabilities when an experience or an activity begins. It gives them independence. The learners with disabilities can use the material on their own or as intended. It supports privacy. This may be less applicable in the earliest years, but learners with disabilities can access the material without sharing their login or other credentials with others. And also ease of use. So when the material is accessible to a child with disability, it works seamlessly with the assistive technology that they use. And ideally, the assistive technology that they choose, that they want to use, rather than their preferred assistive technology, rather than something that may be available or more convenient for the agency to provide. It's all about making sure that child feels like they belong and that they're able to participate independently alongside children without disabilities. So some examples of accessible educational materials in early childhood education include tactile books that include a combination of print and braille, video that includes captioning of sounds and audio description of visual elements, audio files of print-based reading materials, mobile apps that work with assistive technology. So as you can see, these are really the materials that provide content for learning, that are designed in a way that are flexible and that meet the needs of a variety of learners through various sensory modes or various ways that children with disabilities might interact physically with assistive technology. And then the assistive technology part of this connection between AT and AIM and early learning. This definition of AT comes from the Early Childhood TA Center. I thought it was a really good one for this group to think about adopting, and it's that assistive technology can be thought of as any item that supports a child's ability to participate actively in his or her home, childcare program, school, or other community settings. It is a broad term that includes items ranging from something as low-tech as a foam wedge for positioning to something as high-tech as a power wheelchair for independent mobility. So those two examples, the foam wedge and the power wheelchair, may not be something that's connected to specifically to supporting access to a learning material or an interactive. So I came up with some examples of what that AT and accessible educational material connection might look like in early childhood education. So Velcro being attached to pages of hardcover books. So Velcro serving as that assistive technology and allowing access to hardcover books for children who may have physical disabilities or may need support with manual dexterity to turn the pages of a book. Audio players, which could be software or hardware, to play audio files of paper-based reading materials. Magnifiers, again, could be software or hardware to enlarge content in both digital and print-based formats. And switch access to interact with digital learning materials for children with physical disabilities. So given all of that, I also wanted to share this 2025 TA Needs Data Collection report that NCADEMI put together last year. And this report was based on two methods of data collection during 2025, and there was a focus group and a survey. And yes, those sample sizes are real. They're very low, very small sample sizes that we got from our data collection. The data collection period really coincided with a difficult time for getting at the attention of Part C lead agencies and early intervention service providers last year. But we went ahead and we're sharing the data that we got because we also know there's not a lot of data in this area to begin with. So any contribution that can be made to add to what's currently available about what we know about the needs for providing support for children with disabilities and their families in this early age, the more we can provide, the better. So the focus group had 7 participants, and some of you who are here who ultimately joined this ECHO were part of that focus group. Thank you. And the survey had 5 respondents. And some of you may have responded to that. It was an anonymous survey. But what we found was that there's an emphasis on accessible everyday resources and low-tech AT, where there are discussions about the use of AT in early intervention and early childhood education. That there's clearly a need for training on both low-tech and high-tech strategies, as well as supporting professionals and understanding how to document that need in both the IFSP and the IEP. There was a clear importance of family partnerships. Thank you to our parent centers for also being part of this ECHO. That partnership between Part C lead agencies, early intervention, and families is so critical, and that came out in both the focus group and the survey. There are lots of indications that AT assessment approaches in early intervention are mixed. There was a lot of observation that a lot of assessment data comes from informal observations rather than any formal types of assessments, such as for blind children, there would be learning media assessment or the functional vision assessment, and there may not be similar tools to support other types of disabilities, or they're not well known. And there's also commonly a wait and see approach that's a common barrier to identifying a child's need for assistive technology or accessible educational materials. So there's not a lot of proactiveness, especially in early childhood education, particularly for some of the less apparent types of disabilities. Very difficult, obviously, to identify a reading disability in the earliest years. It's sometimes very hard to diagnose a vision or a hearing disability early on. So all of these areas make it really complex for early intervention providers, early childhood education, and other providers to ensure accessibility. And so part of the goal with this early AIM ECHO is to be thinking about this, if not from a universal design for learning perspective, but what are the different ways that we can ensure that there's a variety of resources so that children with disabilities have access to content, to material, so that they can advance and make sure that they are prepared. We can ensure that they're prepared for kindergarten alongside children without disabilities. So some questions for community exploration, and these are not the case questions for today, but these questions are really more about, as we go through this ECHO community, what are some things to kind of continuously be thinking about as on a monthly basis we hear from subject matter experts and we talk about what are some ways that we can improve the provision of assistive technology and accessible materials in early learning. We can return to these questions. How is AT being introduced and used by children ages 0 to 2 in early intervention? How is this use of AT related to social and cognitive development, if at all? To what extent is AT or AIM considered in the IFSP to IEP transition process? How are AT or AIM being used in early childhood education? And to what extent are early childhood education programs procuring digital learning media that meets minimum accessibility standards or higher? So that last one gets more into the technical aspects of ensuring that mobile apps that early childhood education programs might be using, or websites and interactives that they're using, are intentionally and proactively evaluated to make sure that they're going to be accessible with the assistive technology that's used by children in that environment. So to what extent is that happening? So these are the references. This is for the research. The actual, I'm not sure if I dropped the link to the TA needs data collection report, but I'll do that now. I also know it's on the iEcho platform, but in case it's helpful to have it right here from the room. So that TA data collection report, that has the results of NCADEMI's year 1 survey and focus group. There's also, as part of that, this Fluid article, which is Toddlers Tech and Talk, 0 to 3-year-old children's language and literacy learning at home in a post-digital age. We hosted a reading group, and several of you were part of that reading group. So we discussed the results of that reading group, some of the findings, some of the insights that came from that. last year as we were trying to figure out how do we frame technical assistance for this particular population. Thank you to those who participated in that group, and you can read about it as part of our TA report. Okay, and so for those of you who are new to NCADEMI, you can reach out to us anytime. This ECHO is ongoing, it's every month, but if there's some support that you may need, you can reach out to us. Our website is ncademy.org. You can reach us by email at ncademy@usu.edu. We have a telephone number, which is 435-554-8213. You can leave a voicemail or you can text that number. And we also have a monthly newsletter, and that's always has a lot of information in it. As I've said, at NCADEMI, our technical assistance spans across multiple audiences, so you won't always find things that are specifically related to early intervention or early childhood education, but accessibility in general, and to get the context and the broader thinking about where are children with disabilities going as they go into kindergarten and proceed through K-12. What are some of the barriers and what are some of the resources and solutions is what NCADEMI focuses on with our resources. So if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, that's ncademy.org/newsletter. And we're also on LinkedIn. So for those of you who are LinkedIn users, you can follow us there. Okay, so Janelle?
Yeah, I am going to just open it up for a few minutes to any questions anybody has to Cynthia around NCADEMI or the overview of this ECHO. I'm really excited to be learning from everybody on this call too. Gail, I see you came on mute.
That'll learn me. I didn't. I didn't actually have a comment that I was going to make, but I can. I am interested in whether or not you'll continue to do that technical assistance survey where you had the very small number of responses, and whether or not we can help with that.
I think that's a great idea, Gail. So that data collection was a year one knowledge development. So we were collecting information to, obviously, we wanted to make sure that whatever we were providing for technical assistance at NCADEMI for all those 5 different targeted TA groups was going to be as relevant and useful as we could make it. So we set out in year one, in addition to the Part C lead agencies, across all of those targeted TA groups, we did separate surveys and focus groups. So that was a year one activity, but there's no reason why we can't return to that. And that may be something that we could certainly revive as part of this early AIM ECHO, with your assistance to, what do we want to know? What do we want to know? And how do we reach the right people to provide us with that information? We would be happy to incorporate that into this group's goals.
That would be exciting. I think one of the things that always strikes me about the topic of AIM and AT for early childhood and particularly early intervention is that everybody has a different idea of what that is. And I know that that's going to be part of our discussion today in the breakout sessions. But I just think it would be so helpful to have some kind of consistency as we talk about this topic. And I've got a million stories to tell about that, but I'll save them for future echoes.
Great. Thank you, Gail. If there are, Julia, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I liked your roundup with the AA and NCADEMI. I think this topic is important, especially with our young children. I get to meet with families across our state. I'm in Utah with our assistive technology teams, and we often forget that Part C goes with Part B. So having this conversation with that A in NCADEMI, going with the same information, the same interactions, etc., that you spoke about, and bringing that information to our families, because they're thinking possibly about not AIM as in educational materials. Maybe they're thinking about that high tech, whatever it is, and the digital content, but it could be having the same information, the same interactions, could be a paintbrush, right? So the Velcro in a board book and a paintbrush that is accessible is really important to have this conversation with. So I appreciate that coming into this beginning part of this echo as we're thinking in this broad term that you're bringing to us. So thank you for that. It's part of the conversation that we can have with birth to 2, and then as our transitions are happening into our next part B, right? So I appreciate all of that information you've brought to us today.
Thanks for that, Julia. Your comment reminded me of this was not a story that happened in early intervention or early childhood, but it really does reveal what may not have been happening for a student in those early years. And it was a middle schooler. This was probably 5 years ago. And there was a meeting at a school district. It was I was with the AIM Center, the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials at the time, and we were providing support to the state on technical assistance and supporting school districts with improving digital accessibility. And the school district was partnering with the state. They put a team together to take the first steps to look at their system to make improvements. And on that systems steering committee, they added a parent. And one of the first things that you learn under IDEA in the Part B space is that states and school districts are required to provide accessible formats of materials in a timely manner. Timely manner meaning at the time those materials are distributed to the whole class. So if a standard print textbook is distributed to the whole class, a student who needs that book in Braille has that in Braille at the time the standard print textbook is distributed. If a student needs it in audio, it's available in audio, digital text, etc. So when the parent was part of this meeting and they were deliberating this, what does timely manner mean? How do we achieve it? The parent interrupted and said, I just assumed that my child would always be behind. I didn't realize this was a requirement or an expectation. I didn't know it was a discussion. I just always assumed they would always get their materials late, and there was no alternative to that. And that was so enlightening for all of us to hear that, because as a TA center that we had typically always been working with states and school districts, usually the reaction is, oh gosh, how do we do that? The intention is there. We want to do that, but how? But to have that affective, emotional response from somebody who that was really both exciting to them, as well as in a lot of ways, very frustrating, simultaneously. So clearly, this child had gotten through middle school, and there was no high expectations early on about ensuring access at the same time.
Marnie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that story, Cynthia. And I think that highlights another reason why it's so important to think about this work in the Part C context, because it should be true throughout special education, but especially in Part C, so much of what we do is about families and empowering families to understand their children's needs and advocate for them. And in fact, among the outcomes that we measure, right, in the Part C program and that we report on in our SPP APRs, and all of that has to do with the family outcomes as well as the child outcomes. So I hope as we move forward in this conversation, that's a big part of what we talk about, is how do we bring parents into this? How do we educate parents? How do we support parents to continue to advocate for their children?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Any other questions okay, Gil?
Sorry.
You're good.
I'm listening to this conversation and anticipating some of our future conversations. And I have mostly worked in the area of K-12 assistive technology in my career, but I'm really excited to be bringing this topic to the forefront. One of the things in the K-12 arena that's been really helpful to me is some of the documents that were published specifically by OSEP about myths and facts about assistive technology. And as I'm listening to what Cynthia had to say and what some of the others of you are offering, I'm wondering if we might someday make our own list of myths and facts. Might be a fun breakout activity or something, just to like I know that in my career, people often have said, even 10 years ago, oh, assistive technology doesn't apply to infants and toddlers because they're too young to use it. And they're, as Cynthia said, they're thinking Braille or some kind of complicated technology. But it'd be fun to come up with some ideas about what are our myths and facts in early childhood and early intervention.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. And Cynthia, you are coming off mute.
I am. Can I share my screen real quick? So we have a start on that, Gail. We need your
Oh.
help to make it better. But I just dropped in the chat a link to our website. We had to edit at NCADEMI in 2024. We took the myths and facts, those set guidance on helping states and school districts, particularly IEP teams, understand their responsibility around AT, and we applied that to accessible educational materials. And if you recall, in the myth and facts document, there is a myth and fact combinations, a series of them specific to Part C. And so we did address those in our myths and facts version. So you'll see, the myth being that this is AT myth 23, that infants, toddlers, and their families do not benefit from AT devices and services. So we say there that AT devices and services, I'm sorry, if you read through, it's been a while since I've looked at this document, but if you read through that series of AT myths and facts specific, so these are specific to assistive technology, we created this AIM tie-in for those where we say the IDEA requirements related to AIM are specific to Part B, and that's true. Under IDEA in 2000, when AIM was added in 2004, it was specific to Part B. However, there are AIM-related considerations that parents and providers can make while an infant or toddler is receiving Part C services. So we have a little bit of a start here, that you can take a look at, which isn't, obviously it's not comprehensive, but it is a way that we try to initially start that conversation around we shouldn't just overlook AIM in Part C. So that link will take you directly to that section of the document.
Okay. I think it would be fun. I'm off track here. I'm having a squirrel moment, but I think it'd be really fun to try and identify the myths and some of the facts that go with them before we tried to connect it to that OSEP document. Because I imagine a whole new OSEP document if I'm in charge of the world.
Okay, well, Gail, we'll let you be in charge of the world or in charge of your small breakout. So
Okay.
I'm gonna I have sent all the hub members their questions that we are going to tackle in our small breakout groups. And just to have those discussions with everybody on the call, some of the questions that we as the hub team have started to think about as we've been kind of planning for this. So I'm going to go ahead and open all those rooms. Marnie, you and I are in one, but it will take me a minute to join. Hey, everybody should see their breakout rooms. And we will stay in there until about 1:25. Cynthia, do you see yours? Lucy, do you see yours?
bit, but I will be fully responsive here for the time that I am. So I just didn't want to be
Wonderful.